Welcome students to another e-lesson video, this one over a subject many of you are very familiar with, having written these sorts of things since you got into high school. I'm talking about short answer responses. We're going to talk today about how to compose sophisticated short answer responses. As always, when you're watching any of these videos, please feel free to pause, rewind at any time to take notes, rewatch, or catch up. And when I say feel free to take notes, I mean do take notes. The topics we're going to take a look at are, first of all, the purpose of the short answer question and response. Then we're going to take a look at what you've been taught, how you've been taught to write these short answers, and then what you need to know now that you're in AP Lang. The purpose of the short answer. Short answer questions are popular assessment tools. That should seem apparent to you since they've been on every state English test that you've taken in the last few years. But they're also seen quite frequently on exams in college. It's because they're a better measurement of understanding the multiple choice questions. It's that open-ended response versus selected response. It's much easier for a student to kind of fake their way through a selected response test because they're given a series of options. And at that point, just law of averages, you can guess your way through and still do okay. But if you're given an open-ended question, you really have to know your stuff. How do we use these in AP Lang? Well, we're no longer preparing for that state test, but we are preparing for tests in college. Remember, this is a college prep class. So it's important that we practice the art, so to speak, of answering short answer questions. I'm also going to use them. Ms. Kruger and I are both going to be using short answer formats for our reading quizzes. You're going to see short answers on exams. You've seen already a short answer question for a homework assignment. We're going to see short answer questions on daily activities. So it's really important that you understand this format. Let's talk about what you've been taught so far. You've been taught a very rigid structure for writing these, and it probably goes something like this: the AEC format: assertion, evidence, commentary. Meaning you need to start with an assertion, which is a direct answer to the question, then follow that up with evidence, which, as you've been taught before, equals quotation. We're going to talk about why that's not necessarily the case. Then finally, commentary, which is just an explanation of your answer. Unlike writing essays, using a rigid structure isn't necessarily a bad idea for short answer questions, because short answers aren't really pieces of literature. Our whole point in discussing the nature of the essay the other day in class was to remind ourselves that the essay is a piece of literature. It's a piece of art that does not need to be confined to a specific structure. Short answer questions, though, short answer responses, those aren't pieces of literature. They're just responses to a question. They're assessments of your knowledge. That is a true assessment tool and nothing else. So having a rigid structure isn't necessarily bad. The AEC, the assertion, evidence, commentary structure, works okay. But the way it's taught is somewhat limiting. And what I mean by limiting is it's very restrictive. And we're going to talk about that when we look at some examples here in just a minute. So here's what I'm saying we're going to do. I'm not going to teach you a new method of writing short answer responses necessarily. We're not going to be going outside of the box in writing short answer responses. I am, however, going to enlarge that box. I'm going to make that box a little broader for you so that you'll feel free to write something good before you write something according to the formula. What you need to know now: short answer responses in my class and from this point forward in your college classes as well should be between 100 and 120 words, unless of course a professor specifies something else. It should contain just two things: an answer followed by support. That's it. Now, really, you're getting that when you write the AEC response, because an assertion is the answer and your evidence and commentary is support. But these are the only two words I like to use in talking about short answer questions: answer and support. And the reason is I don't like to use the term evidence. It's a very restrictive term. It implies, the word evidence implies that that you need some sort of proof in the form of data, like a detective needs evidence to solve a case. This isn't always what's needed, though, in a short answer question. I like to use the word support because support opens up the doorway to use a lot of different things to well, support your answer. Support can be evidence, like you're used to. It can also be just an illustration of an idea, or an example of something, or a hypothetical scenario that you outline to prove a point. Support can also just be pure logic, just explaining your reasoning. Support can be an explanation, a clarification, a definition, or any combination of those things. And it can also be, text information, things like quotations, paraphrases, and summaries. And so I like to use the word support to just kind of broaden that box for you a little bit, because what I don't want you guys doing is always looking for a quote, because that's not always what's called for. Sometimes you just need to explain yourself. Sometimes you just need to illustrate it with a hypothetical example, and that doesn't always fit into the very narrow structure that you've been taught for the STAR exam. All right, let's look at last class's homework. I want to end this short e-lesson video with just looking at some sample short answer questions. You guys actually, if you completed the homework, have already completed your first short answer question of the year. That question over that was at the end of the Walden and Transcendentalism lesson went something like this: how might the way America was changing, the evolving social, cultural, economic, political, technological, and geographical climates in the early mid-19th century have influenced the Transcendentalists and their beliefs? And I just told you, respond to this in a paragraph with 100+ words. This is a short answer question. You want to respond to this question with a paragraph. Now, I hope too many of you didn't panic and start immediately looking for, where's my text evidence? I got to have a quote. The examples I'm going to show you are very good examples, very solid. None of them use quotes. So you always want to respond with a paragraph, 100 to 120 words. When you start creeping over 120 words, you need to ask yourself, am I still responding to the question, for one, and am I giving more than what's required? Because remember, this isn't a piece of literature. You're just responding to demonstrate that you understand something. This is an assessment tool. Your paragraph also needs to provide an answer and support for that answer, and you just have to use your best judgment in figuring out how to best support your answer, be it through an illustration, an example, through paraphrase, summary, demonstrating your logic, explaining, describing, whatever. So here's a response that I received. Thank you for those of you who are doing your homework early, like you go home the night it's assigned and do that. For one thing, it's making your lives a heck of a lot easier. For another thing, it's actually building a little bit of ethos with your instructors. That's a concept we're going to cover another time, but we really appreciate that. It shows us that you're committed and you get it. You also give me some great examples that I can use in videos. Here we go. This student responded thusly: it was readily apparent in the mid-19th century that industrialization and capitalism were committed as injustices to the urban poor majority. That sounds good so far, not really answering the question, but keep reading. This most likely is where the concept that people in nature are inherently pure but corrupted by society and its institutions was born from. In addition, the free market economy was based on Enlightenment ideals, ironically leading most Americans to live, quote, unfree lives. This most likely led to the rejection of Enlightenment rationalism characteristics of Transcendentalism. When it became evident that new technology and economy, I should say a shifting economy, something like that, were not conducive to the American ideals, Transcendentalists called for a return to a simpler life. This is an effective response. This is definitely an effective response. It contains an answer and it contains credible support to that answer. However, if this student had written something like this on a STAR exam, it may not have scored so highly. And it's because the student doesn't actually answer the question officially until the last sentence. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I feel like this particular passage kind of builds up to the answer, and so this works fine. So that's why I'm trying to expand this box here for you guys, because if this student had led off with this sentence, I don't think it would have been nearly as good of a paragraph. But as you can see, a lot of explanation, some summarizing of what the student learned from the videos, and then kind of synthesized all of that to draw this conclusion. So that's an effective response. Here's another one. This one's a little bit longer. That doesn't always necessarily mean better. Let's see. In the early mid-19th century, the socioeconomic environment of America changed drastically due to the market revolution. It's not quite answering the question yet, but it's a good start. As factories developed and workers began to move from farming to manufacturing, the transcendentalist ideal of individual freedom was lost to a great degree. However, these changes would have an important impact on transcendentalist beliefs. The student's setting me up for the answer. I like this. Surprised and maybe even overwhelmed by the plethora of jobs and options the new economy offered, the transcendentalists likely advocated a return to the basics. There's an explanation of logic right there. For example, consider that Thoreau's stay at Walden Pond took place from 1845 to 1847, about 30 years after the beginning of the market revolution, which began around 1820. In response to the increasingly structured and rigid social classes and economic structure, he went back, he referring to Thoreau, Thoreau went back to the simplest way of life possible. As people moved to big cities in increasing numbers, he retreated to the woods, and as technology became more advanced, he tried to avoid it entirely. Nice parallelism. This return to simplicity was the major influence that the market revolution had on the transcendentalists, and it was in keeping with their philosophy of self-improvement and rebellion against society's corrupting influences. Yet again, we have a student who officially, fully, directly answers the question in the final sentence, but they've been hinting at it this whole time. They've been building up to it. This is an exemplary response. This is very, very good. Here's another one. During the early 19th century, America underwent massive economic and environmental change. Before this time, in the late 1700s and first decade of the 1800s, the average American family was largely self-sufficient, relying on nature and their own labor to produce what they needed to survive. With the introduction of factories, which drastically changed the environmental landscape, and other concepts during the Industrial Revolution, such as division of labor, however many families, primarily women, became dependent on their employers for their sustenance. That's a little confusing in there with it's just a syntactic problem. This dependence upon others and destruction of nature for factories and the growth of urban areas was seen by the transcendentalists as limitations of freedom and a corruption of the purity of nature and the spirit of man. So this student starts off telling us kind of narrowing down the focus, economic and environmental change, then they explain it. Then once again, their concluding sentence is the answer, and it's set up very well by all of these. This is probably not quite an effective response, but this is definitely an adequate response, and probably an adequate high response. And the only thing that's dropping it from an effective response is this kind of mess of prose in here. When your prose starts to confuse your meaning, then you start losing points. There we go. So as you can see by these three examples, there's no real one way of doing anything as far as short answers are concerned. You can lead off with a very strong assertion and then support it with however you'd like to support it, or you can do as some of these students have done, which is sort of address the prompt, but then explain and then finally draw a conclusion at the end. There's a lot of different ways to do this. The only thing you have to have is somewhere in here an answer and support for that answer, and it all has to flow to demonstrate that you know how to write. We always test that you know how to write. Alright, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Feel free to watch again, especially if you forgot to take notes. Make sure you are taking notes on every lesson you get from here on out. I will be updating the notes topics list on the website here momentarily. Thanks again for watching.